Hello, and welcome to my channel. I'm Margaret, and here I share real-life stories from my friends at the nursing home. I overheard him call me baggage while slicing carrots for his lunch. He thought I was in the laundry room, but I'd come back into the kitchen to grab my reading glasses from the counter. The phone was wedged between his cheek and shoulder, his back to me. He was chuckling, low and indulgent, the way he did when he was flirting, though I hadn't heard that tone in years, not since our daughter's wedding. "I can't just pick up and leave like that," he was saying. "Not with Ruth here. You know how it is. Baggage." He laughed. She laughed too, on the other end. A woman's laugh, younger, loose and glinting, like glass chimes on a windy day. I stood there, still as the butcher block. He called me baggage. Me. After 35 years of marriage, after 35 years of raising his daughter, nursing his father through hospice, organizing every Christmas dinner, and reminding him where he left his blood pressure pills. I went upstairs without saying a word, closed the bedroom door quietly behind me, and sat on the edge of the bed, still holding the paring knife. My fingers smelled like celery. My stomach clenched so hard I thought I might be sick. Instead, I opened the nightstand drawer and pulled out an old leather-bound notebook I hadn't used in years. One of those thick, lined journals I used to keep when I taught middle school. I dated the first page. March 3rd, heard him call me baggage on a phone call with a woman, likely romantic. Then I turned the page and kept going. "My name is Ruth Ellen Atwood. I'm 65 years old. For 39 years, I taught 7th grade English in the same public school district outside Richmond, Virginia. I retired 3 years ago after one of my knees finally gave out during a fire drill. I left with 2 suitcases of graded essays, a plaque, and a good pension. I liked teaching. I liked seeing kids figure out how to say what they meant. I liked giving them words for things they didn't know they felt. What I didn't like was how invisible I became once I stopped working. I didn't realize how much of my identity was tied up in being useful. After I retired, Gordon barely looked up when I walked into the room. He used to say, "There's my girl." Now it was just, "Did you pick up the dry cleaning?" Or, "The garbage truck comes early tomorrow." We stopped going out to dinner. We stopped holding hands. He'd scroll through his phone while we watched TV and flinch if I leaned in to see the screen. I thought maybe it was just aging. We'd settled. That's what people did, right? Until I heard the word baggage. I didn't ask him about it that night, or the next day. Instead, I started taking notes. Phone records, credit card charges, changes in mood. I had time, and no one noticed a quiet old woman writing things down. Not in the car, not at the coffee shop, not in the middle of folding towels with the news murmuring in the background. The first thing I looked up was the number he was calling so often. Clarissa Haynes, financial planner, Merrill Lynch, Alexandria branch, 36 years old, blonde, big smile. Her headshots looked like she was selling toothpaste and mutual funds at the same time. Her LinkedIn tagline read, "Helping people thrive at any stage of life." I laughed out loud. My hand was shaking when I wrote her name down in my notebook. March 5th, Clarissa, 36, financial planner. Gordon called her 27 times this month. I started digging into our accounts. I hadn't looked at them in years. Gordon always insisted on managing the finances. "You're the smart one in the family," I'd tease him. "Why mess with a good system?" But when I started paying attention, things didn't feel so smart. A $400 dinner charge in Alexandria. 2 hotel bookings listed as client accommodations. Jewelry store purchases. Consulting fees sent through a shell LLC. The deeper I looked, the more it felt like our life was a sheet cake, and Gordon had cut out a hidden piece and iced over the whole. And it wasn't just betrayal. it was strategy. He was planning something. I thought about confronting him. I stood at the kitchen counter one afternoon, arms crossed, watching him scroll through his phone, and I imagined myself blurting it out. So, what does Clarissa offer that I don't, besides spreadsheets and Pilates? But I didn't. I'd spent a lifetime de-escalating middle school drama. I knew timing mattered. I knew you waited until the person revealed what they didn't mean to say. So instead, I started smiling, pouring his coffee without being asked, asking about his meetings, saying things like, "I'm so glad you're still staying active," when he came home late, smelling like new cologne. He didn't suspect a thing. It's amazing how invisible a woman becomes after 60. I made myself a ghost, just long enough to watch him trip over the furniture. The thing about betrayal is that it replays, not just once, but all the time, in the smallest of ways. I started noticing how often Gordon dismissed me. "Don't worry about that, sweetheart. I'll handle it." "That's boring. You wouldn't be interested." "Just some technical stuff." He didn't realize I'd spent 40 years translating Shakespeare into vocabulary a seventh grader could understand. I could understand anything if I wanted to. I ordered books on financial abuse, on hidden assets, on forensic accounting. I taught myself how to pull tax records and cross-reference them with investment portfolios. I called an old student of mine who worked in compliance for a local bank and asked vague, hypothetical questions. Say you were trying to trace account movement across multiple states, but one person was in the dark. He didn't press. He just told me where to start. By April, my notebook was half full. April 1st. Gordon spent $6,782 from our shared retirement account. April 3rd. Bought Clarissa a necklace, Tiffany, silver with a pearl. April 5th. Told me he was considering downsizing, recommended I start decluttering. That last one hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just that he was cheating. It was that he was planning to leave me behind and pretend it was mutual. A clean break, a practical decision, a respectful parting of ways. I was supposed to accept it like a gentle retirement speech. We wish Ruth well in her next chapter. I wasn't going to be his exit interview. I had a decision to make. I could stay and let him slowly erase me, until one day he was bringing Clarissa to our neighborhood book club picnic and introducing her as his partner. Or I could go, but not empty-handed, and not quietly. I picked the second option. It started with the taxes. Gordon hated paperwork. Every year, he dragged it out until mid-April, then spent a weekend grumbling and swearing under his breath about deductions and receipts. "I don't know why I always get stuck with this crap," he muttered one evening, flipping through a manila folder. "You'd think with a teacher's pension we'd get some damn breaks." I was sitting across from him, knitting a baby blanket for a neighbor's newborn. "Want me to help?" I asked, keeping my voice light. He looked up, surprised. "You want to help with taxes?" "I used to do the entire math department's lesson budgets," I said. "I think I can manage a few receipts." He laughed. "Be my guest." He handed over a stack. What he didn't realize was that he'd also handed me an invitation. For the next 3 weeks, I went through every file in our home office. Not just tax returns, but statements, transfers, business deductions, investment notes. And what I found made my mouth go dry. He had diverted nearly $84,000 over 3 years into a consulting account linked to a business Clarissa had incorporated in her name. It was buried under vague codes: marketing, advising, strategic growth. But I taught advanced reading for decades. I could spot passive voice and corporate euphemisms in my sleep. He was funding her. He was helping her build something, a firm, maybe, a life, while leaving me breadcrumbs. I needed help. Not a divorce lawyer, not yet. I needed someone who understood leverage. So I found someone. Her name was Camille, 71, sharp as a scalpel. She was a friend of a friend from my retired teachers' book group and had spent 20 years as a financial investigator for the SEC before retiring to paint watercolors and collect stray cats. When I told her what I'd found, she whistled. "Honey," she said, "you don't just have dirt. You've got oil, a whole well of it." She helped me scan and sort everything. Timeline, document trail, confirmed code violations. We organized it into a series of packets, each one labeled and indexed like a prosecutor's evidence board. At the end, she looked at me over her bifocals and said, "You can blow this up, or you can sell it back to him." "Sell it?" She nodded. "You want to leave clean, with a cushion? You've got two buyers, him or her. One of them will pay to keep this buried." I sat there for a long time, fingers trembling just a little on the envelope. I chose her. Let the mistress pay for my retirement. The envelope I sent to Clarissa was plain. No return address, no watermark. Just a cream-coloured 9 by 12 mailer with her name typed in the middle and hand-delivered by a courier service with a reputation for discretion. Inside, one USB drive and a single typed note. "You are a fiduciary. What's enclosed would interest your compliance office and your clients." Nothing more, no signature, no threats. Just the truth, wrapped in silence. I waited 3 days. I didn't call, didn't email. I went about my week like normal, baking lemon bread for the church potluck, taking a gentle yoga class, cleaning the linen closet. Gordon barely noticed. He was too busy pacing in his office, whispering urgently into his phone. On Friday night, he came home late, smelled like sweat and cologne and anxiety. He didn't speak to me, just poured himself 2 fingers of scotch and sat in the darkened living room, eyes on the fireplace, even though it was April and warm enough to sleep with the windows open. That was when I knew she got the package, and she wasn't staying quiet. It didn't unravel all at once. It never does. It started with him changing his phone password, twice in 1 week. Then his keys disappeared from the hallway hook. Then came the heavy silences, the long drives, the cold dinners, the wine left unfinished. He was being shut out, by her firm, by something bigger than he could control. And through it all, I sat at the breakfast table, sipping my coffee and asking, "Cream or sugar today, hun?" He never looked me in the eye. The next step was practical. Extract myself. I didn't want to be tied to his name, his credit, his risk profile. So I opened a new account at a bank in a neighboring town under my maiden name. Pulled what was legally mine and nothing more. Pension. Savings I could trace directly to my years of teaching. Birthday money. Gifts from my late mother. All documented, all clean. Camille introduced me to a lawyer, Marcia Allen, who specialized in what she called graceful divorces with fangs. She didn't blink when I handed her the packet. Her only question, "Do you want to ruin him or free yourself?" I said, "Both, but mostly the second." She smiled. "Then we'll make him pay to keep the first from happening." By mid-May, Clarissa had vanished. Her LinkedIn went dark. Her website redirected to a 404 error. The branch office where she worked listed a new regional advisor. Gordon stopped shaving. He left the dishes to crust in the sink. He forgot to mow the lawn. "You okay?" I asked one afternoon, leaning against the kitchen doorframe. He didn't answer, just stared at a dead spot in the backyard grass. The thing is, I felt sorry for him in that moment. But I didn't stop. Because pity doesn't erase betrayal. There's something sacred about packing in silence. Each drawer I opened, each picture frame I wrapped, felt like a small funeral for a life I had pretended was mine. I didn't want the good china. I didn't want the floral couch he insisted on keeping from his mother's estate. I didn't want the partner's golf trophy he displayed above the TV, even though he hadn't played a round in 2 years. I took my journals, my books, my mother's quilt, and the copper kettle we bought in Vermont on our 10th anniversary, the one I always cleaned, even though he never noticed it. I left the wedding album, not out of pain, but because it didn't feel like mine anymore. I found a small rental in Williamsburg, quiet, with lots of light and a fenced garden. The landlord was a woman named Valerie, divorced, kind-eyed, with a rescue spaniel and a love of antique maps. She showed me the sunroom and said, "This is where the last tenant used to paint." I nodded and said, "Maybe I'll learn how." She handed me the key like it was a passport. I didn't leave a note for Gordon. I left a list. To do: file taxes, cancel joint Costco membership, replace kitchen sink filter, don't lie to the next woman. Then at the bottom, in smaller letters, this was never about revenge. It was about respect. You misplaced it. I reclaimed it. The reaction came swift. 3 days after I moved, my lawyer called. "He's offering a settlement." I blinked. "Already?" She laughed. "Clarissa's firm initiated an internal audit. He's trying to patch holes before it turns criminal. He wants this tied off and gone." She read the terms: full spousal support for life, clean division of assets, my name off all remaining debts, and a lump sum payout for emotional restitution. "Restitution?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. Marcia smiled. "Men don't like the word guilt, but they'll pay for silence." I signed the papers that afternoon, with hands that didn't shake. The check cleared the next day. 6 figures. I stared at the screen for a long time, heart quiet, not racing, not gloating, just quiet. I closed the laptop, made a grilled cheese sandwich, ate it slowly in the sunroom. Then I wrote one sentence in my journal. Freedom is not a reward. It's a right you reclaim when you finally stop asking for permission. A month later, I saw Gordon by accident. I was at the farmer's market with Valerie, looking at wildflower bouquets. He walked by on the opposite side of the vendor lane, wearing a wrinkled polo and scuffed loafers. Alone. He looked over, eyes briefly landing on mine. I smiled, not bitter, not smug, just full. He blinked, like he couldn't quite place me. And maybe, in that moment, he couldn't. Because the woman standing in front of him, brows sun-kissed, smile unburdened, arms full of zinnias and basil, wasn't the baggage he thought he left behind. She was someone new, someone light. People ask me if I'd ever remarry. I tell them no. But I'll dance. I'll flirt. I'll host dinner parties with too much wine and too many candles. I'll grow tomatoes and learn to paint, and maybe fall in love with a dog or a tree or the ocean. But I won't carry anyone again. Not unless they carry me too. There's a kind of grace in living well after betrayal. It's not loud, it doesn't shout. It just keeps blooming. Like lavender by the kitchen window. Like forgiveness, when it's finally meant for yourself. The morning after the money cleared, I woke up at 5:30 without an alarm. Old teacher habits, I suppose. My body still thought it had to grade essays or organize supply closets before sunrise. But instead of rolling over or reaching for my robe, I padded into the sunroom, barefoot and quiet, and opened the windows. The air smelled like cut grass and dew. A mourning dove called in the distance. It was the first morning in over a year that I didn't feel like I was pretending to be okay. I sat in a wicker chair with my tea and let my shoulders fall from my ears. Just a fraction. Just enough to know they could. Valerie, my landlord-turned-friend, had a friend who ran a local arts co-op. Mostly retirees, some hobbyists, a few former professionals. They offered weekly classes in everything from watercolors to memoir writing to sculpture. You ever try painting? She asked one afternoon while we clipped dead heads off her hydrangeas. I shook my head. I used to decorate classroom bulletin boards. That's about it. You'd be great, she said, handing me a flyer. There's a Monday morning group. No pressure. Just bring a smock and show up. I showed up. And I stayed. There's something about holding a brush in your hand that makes you feel like you're rewriting your own narrative. The first thing I painted was a teacup. I didn't mean for it to be symbolic, but it was. It had a tiny chip on the rim. The lines weren't straight. The shadow was all wrong. But it was mine, and it didn't need to be perfect. Neither did I. Meanwhile, Gordon tried calling. Once, then twice, then not again. The first time I stared at the phone until it stopped ringing, then blocked the number. Camille advised me to keep all communication through legal channels. The man can afford a lawyer, she said. Let him use one. He never emailed, never wrote. I think he understood, on some level, that the silence was final. Not rage, not punishment. Just final. About 2 months after the divorce, I got a letter in the mail from Clarissa. It was typed, 2 pages, on thick, expensive paper. She didn't apologize, not directly. She also didn't deny anything. She said, I underestimated you. Then, I thought I was the future, but I was just a phase. And finally, if you ever decide to go public, I will not contest anything you share. I folded the letter in half and slid it into the back of my notebook. I didn't need it. Not anymore. But it felt like closure, in its own way. Like a curtain falling on a bad play. I turned 66 that July. Valerie threw me a small birthday dinner in her backyard. String lights, bruschetta, lemon tart. Camille brought a bottle of champagne and a wrapped gift. A thick, empty sketchbook with the words, Reinvention in Progress, embossed on the cover. I cried a little when I opened it. Not because I was sad, but because I wasn't. It had been a long time since I felt anything without guilt braided into it. We drank too much, told old stories, laughed until we were breathless. It felt like youth, or maybe something better. It felt like truth. A few weeks later, I started writing again. Not notes, not documentation. Stories. Vignettes. Tiny memoirs. Scenes from a life I thought I'd lost, but realized I'd merely paused. I wrote about the day I met Gordon in college, about the moment I saw Clarissa's profile for the first time, about peeling apples with my mother in the kitchen, and the sound of chalk on a blackboard, and the ache behind my knees after every parent-teacher night. Some stories made me weep. Others made me laugh out loud at myself. I began submitting them, anonymously, to a few small literary magazines. 2 got accepted. Valerie baked brownies to celebrate. Some nights, I still think of Gordon. Not with longing. With curiosity. Who was he really? Was he always capable of what he did? Did I ignore the signs? Did I shrink to make him feel bigger? Or did he simply stop loving me because I became too familiar? I don't have answers. And honestly, I no longer need them. Because the real question isn't about him. It's about me. Why did I stay so long? Why did I make myself small? Why did I call compromise what was actually slow erasure? The truth is, we teach people how to treat us. And I was a very patient teacher. But I've retired from that role too. Now I only give lessons to those who pay with presence, not pity. One day, at the co-op, a woman named Marie brought in a canvas with a giant yellow flower on it. Wild, messy, joyful. She said, I used to be a florist before my hands gave out. I still miss the smell. I told her about my old garden, about the tomatoes that never ripened, about the azaleas that thrived no matter how hard I tried to kill them. She laughed. Sounds like they knew you needed a win. I think about that sometimes. What blooms even when we forget to feed it? what stays alive inside us, waiting for water. I took a trip alone that fall, rented a small cabin by the coast, brought books and sweaters and a camera I barely knew how to use. I walked the shoreline every morning, collected shells, took blurry pictures of sunrise. On the last night, I built a fire and sat outside wrapped in a blanket, the sea wind tangling my hair. And I whispered into the dark, "I am not baggage." I said it softly, not for drama, just for proof, because hearing it out loud meant it was true. The final piece of my reinvention came unexpectedly. Valerie's co-op offered me a small slot in their spring showcase, a single table to display whatever you like. I hesitated. I wasn't a real artist. My watercolors were simple. Quiet landscapes, pots of herbs, teacups, windowsills. But Camille looked at one of them, a crooked wooden bench under a tree, and said, "This looks like peace. People pay for that." So I said yes. I framed 6 pieces, printed small cards with the title "Retired," "Reclaimed." On the day of the event, I wore a soft linen dress and a coral scarf my daughter had given me years ago and hadn't asked about since. People stopped, smiled, asked questions. One woman touched a painting of a half-empty chair and whispered, "This reminds me of when my mother left my father." She looked just like this afterward, like she could finally breathe. I nearly cried right there. Instead, I handed her the painting. She tried to pay. I shook my head. "This one's meant for you." That night, I lay in bed watching the shadows on the ceiling and thought, I used to believe reinvention was something wild, an epiphany, a grand act, a lightning strike. But it isn't. It's making one new choice every day. One day, you take the first note. One day you move your money. One day you say no instead of okay. And one day, without meaning to, you wake up and realize, you are not the woman he left. You are the woman who left first. I hadn't heard from our daughter in a while. She lived in Boston, married, busy. We'd grown apart over the years, slowly, imperceptibly, like leaves fading in fall. She'd taken Gordon's side when things broke apart, or at least she hadn't taken mine. "She's just confused," Gordon had said when she missed our mediation hearing. "She doesn't want to get involved," I corrected. Still, I sent birthday cards, Christmas notes, no guilt, just love. And then, in December, I received a voicemail. "Hi, Mom. I know it's been a while. I heard about everything. And I'm sorry. I want to visit, if that's okay." I listened to it 3 times. Then I sat at the kitchen table and cried for 20 minutes straight. Not because I was angry, but because something old in me, something curled and small, finally unfolded. She came that weekend, wore a wool coat and her father's eyes. I didn't push. I made soup. We ate on the couch, talked about nothing, then slowly, everything. She said, "I didn't know. I should have asked. I believed his version." I said, "We all believe the stories we're fed when they're familiar." She asked, "Are you happy now?" I said, "I'm real now. That's more important." Before she left, she wandered into the sunroom and pointed at my easel. "You painted that?" I nodded. She blinked. "I didn't know you did art." I smiled. I didn't either. She looked at me for a long time. Then she hugged me like a daughter again. Not a referee, not a witness, just a daughter. It's funny how healing sneaks in. Not as a tidal wave, but as a teaspoon. A good night's sleep. A new recipe that turns out just right. A slow dance in the living room when no one's watching. One day you wake up and your face in the mirror isn't tired. It's yours. Your laugh isn't polite. It's free. Your memories don't ache. They bloom. Sometimes people ask, If you could go back and do it differently, would you have left sooner? And I always say the same thing. No, because then I wouldn't have this story. And stories, honest ones, are rare currency. Not revenge, but proof. That you can be discarded and still be divine. That you can be called baggage and still arrive. The money I received paid for a small condo, modest travels, and my healthcare. But more than that, it paid for time. Time to wander, time to paint, time to grieve without urgency, and time to remember who I was before I wore the label wife like a name tag I couldn't peel off. One day, I opened that old notebook, the one I'd started the night he called me baggage. I flipped through the pages, my own handwriting strange and steady. So much pain, packed neatly. So much proof. I thought about burning it. But instead, I tore out one page. The very first. March 3rd. Heard him call me baggage on a phone call with a woman, likely romantic. And I painted over it. Not to erase it, but to layer it. With something soft and blue and alive. I no longer need to prove anything. Not to him. Not to her. Not to the past. My life is mine now. Unfolded, unclaimed, unashamed. And when I walk through the co-op gallery, or sip tea in the sun, or say yes to a new experience, I carry nothing but myself. No weight, no permission, no baggage. Just me.